Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions: the mystery of the Cathar Treasure, what the medieval heretics hid before they were burned alive. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction. Not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. On the night of March 16, 1244, 4 men carrying a heavy bundle let themselves down the sheer limestone walls of the mountain fortress of Montségur in the Languedoc region of southern France. Behind them, in the fortress, were more than 200 of their fellow believers, members of the Cathar faith, a Christian heretical movement that had flourished in southern France for more than a century. 2 weeks earlier, Montségur had surrendered to a crusading army sent by the King of France and the Pope after a siege of more than 10 months. The terms of surrender specified that those who recanted their Cathar faith would be spared, those who refused would be burned. None of the 200 recanted. On March 16, 1244, they walked down the mountain into the waiting bonfires of the Inquisition. But 3 days before the surrender, 4 men had been lowered from the walls carrying something the Cathar defenders had refused to hand over. No one knows what it was. The Cathars were a dualist Christian sect. They believed the material world was the creation of an evil god, and only the spiritual world was the creation of the true, good God. They rejected the Catholic Church's sacraments, its wealth, its hierarchy, and its identification of the Pope with divine authority. They had spread across southern France, the Languedoc, and into northern Italy during the 12th century, gaining the allegiance of much of the local nobility who appreciated their asceticism and resented the corruption of the Catholic hierarchy. The Pope's response was the Albigensian Crusade, 1209–1229, a military campaign that was explicitly genocidal in its intent. The Crusade's most infamous moment came at the sack of Béziers in 1209, when a papal legate, asked how to distinguish Cathar from Catholic, reportedly replied, "Kill them all. God will recognize his own." The 4 men who escaped Montségur with their mysterious bundle have been identified in historical documents as parfaits, ordained members of the Cathar priesthood, the pure ones who lived lives of extreme asceticism and were considered fully initiated into Cathar theology. They were the only ones who fled. The 200 who remained walked into the fire. The significance of what the 4 men carried, whatever it was clearly worth more to the Cathar leadership than the lives of their own people. Treasure hunters, mystics, and historians have been searching for it for 780 years. The theories about what it might have been have ranged from gold and silver to something far more extraordinary. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we go further, if you are finding this investigation compelling, please take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment below with your thoughts, and share it with someone who loves a good historical mystery. If you are watching on YouTube, hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. If you found us through Facebook, tap follow on our page. It takes just a few seconds, and it genuinely helps us keep making these documentaries. Now, let us get back to the investigation. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the landscape of modern documented mysteries, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. Human perception is fallible. This is not an insult, it is neuroscience. The brain does not passively record reality, it actively constructs it, filling gaps with expectation, inferring causes from insufficient data, and storing memories that are reshaped by subsequent experience. Eyewitness testimony, is the weakest form of courtroom evidence precisely because what people see and what actually happened frequently diverge. Sound can cause visual hallucinations. Infrasound at specific frequencies can produce feelings of dread, the sensation of a presence, and even visual disturbances. Sleep deprivation, stress, and hypoxia can generate vivid experiences indistinguishable from waking reality. All of this is relevant when evaluating modern mysteries. Many apparently anomalous experiences have prosaic explanations rooted in human neurology, temporal lobe activity, hypnagogic hallucinations, shared social expectation shaping perception. A willingness to consider these explanations is not dismissiveness, it is intellectual hygiene. The brain is capable of generating extraordinarily convincing experiences that have no external cause, and yet, the perceptual explanation has its limits. It cannot account for physical evidence, radiation burns, landing traces, electromagnetic interference on electronic equipment, or anomalous readings on calibrated instruments. When multiple independent witnesses, separated by distance, report identical details, mass hallucination strains credulity. When physical measurements corroborate subjective experience, the neurological explanation is insufficient. These are the cases that demand another look. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades, and patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter. The core evidence surrounding the Cathar Treasure, what the medieval heretics hid before they were burned alive, is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. The Cathars, from the Greek katharos, were a dualist Christian movement that flourished in the Languedoc region of southern France and adjacent areas from approximately 1100 to 1320 CE. Their core theological doctrine was that the material world was created by an evil demiurge, identified with the Old Testament God, while the spiritual realm was the creation of the true God. The soul, being spiritual, was trapped in the material world and was reincarnated until it achieved spiritual purity, at which point it would return to the spiritual realm. The path to spiritual liberation required renouncing all material attachments, which the Cathar priesthood, the parfaits or perfecti, did in their lifetimes, while ordinary believers, credents, merely sympathized and received last rites from the parfaits. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered Montségur Safe Mountain was the final major stronghold of the Cathar movement in France. Located on a steep limestone rock, Pag, in the Pyrenean foothills of the Ariège department. It served as both a fortress and a major Cathar religious center from approximately 1204 to 1244. The siege of Montségur began in May 1243 and was conducted by a force of several thousand royal and episcopal troops. The fortress's extremely strong natural position, accessible only by a few dangerous paths up near vertical rock faces, allowed the defenders to hold out for 10 months before negotiating the surrender that led to the mass burning of March 16, 1244. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine the historical documentation for the escape of the four parfaits is found in the records of the Inquisition, specifically in the testimony of two survivors who had recanted their faith, and in one remarkable account from a nobleman, named Imbert de Salas, who was present at Montségur during the siege and who specifically mentions the escape and describes the escapees as carrying the treasure of the Cathars. The Inquisition was intensely interested in what the four men had taken away and interrogated survivors repeatedly about it. The records of these interrogations, preserved in the Archives nationales in Paris, refer to something described with unusual reticence, suggesting the inquisitors themselves were uncertain about its nature. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation. But the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, the historical Cathar treasure in a literal sense was significant but not mysterious. Medieval Cathar communities accumulated wealth through donations from credents and supporters, and Montségur in its last years served as a depository for community funds. An earlier escape from Montségur, approximately 3 months before the final surrender, involved a smaller group who took a portion of gold and silver, the financial reserves of the Cathar community, and hid it in the surrounding mountains. This financial treasure was eventually tracked down by the Inquisition. What the final four escapees took was apparently different. Neither the inquisitors nor subsequent investigators connected what they carried with the previously hidden financial treasure. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of the romantic theories about the Cathar treasure have proliferated since the 19th century, when French occultists began connecting the Cathar story with the legend of the Holy Grail. The philosopher and poet Josephine Paladin proposed in 1895 that the Cathars were the guardians of the Grail. Subsequent theorists have proposed that the treasure was the Holy Grail itself, secret texts revealing the true nature of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, documents proving the illegitimacy of the Catholic papacy, a physical artifact of Jewish or temple origins smuggled from Jerusalem, or, in the most elaborate 20th century theories, documents connecting the bloodline of Jesus to the Merovingian dynasty of France. None of these theories has any evidential support beyond the basic fact that something was carried out of Montségur. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding. Rennes-le-Château, a tiny village in the Languedoc not far from Montségur, became the focus of an elaborate treasure. Legend in the late 19th century, when a local priest named Bérenger Saunière began spending inexplicable amounts of money renovating the church and building an elaborate estate. Theories proliferated that Saunière had found some form of treasure, possibly Cathar, possibly Visigothic, possibly connected to the Knights Templar. The Rennes-le-Château mystery became the basis for popular books, including The Holy Blood and The Holy Grail 1982, and eventually for Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. Investigations have suggested the more prosaic explanation that Saunière was running a simony scheme, selling masses for money, but the legend has proved far more attractive than the reality. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence. Misidentification or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations, and in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain the Cathar Treasure, what the medieval heretics hid before they were burned alive. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that the sacred text theory proposes that the Cathar Treasure was a collection of sacred texts, possibly the Cathar version of the New Testament, theological commentaries, or ritual texts that would have been valuable to the Inquisition as evidence and to the Cathars as spiritual property. Cathar parfaits were notably literate and placed great value on their theological writings. A library of Cathar texts would have been worth enormous sacrificial effort to preserve. Under this theory, the texts may have been buried in the cave systems of the Pyrenean foothills, where they may still survive in sealed chambers protected by the dry mountain climate. Several searches of the relevant area have been conducted without definitive results. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that the financial reserve theory, the most prosaic and probably the most accurate explanation, holds that the four parfaits carried the remaining financial reserves of the Cathar movement, gold, silver, and valuable portable property, to a prearranged hiding place where it could be used to support surviving Cathar communities and continue the parfait mission. Under this model, the treasure was not mystical but practical, and the secrecy surrounding it reflected the need to prevent the Inquisition from locating funds that would allow the Cathar movement to survive. The treasure may have been used over subsequent decades by the last surviving Cathar parfaits. The movement continued underground until approximately 1320 and eventually exhausted. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that the Holy Grail theory connects the Cathar treasure to the legend of the Holy Grail, proposing that the Cathars possessed either the physical Grail, a cup, a stone, or a document, or knowledge about its location. This theory, popularized by Otto Rahn in his 1933 book Crusade against the Grail, and subsequently adopted by dozens of popular writers, identifies Montségur as the Grail castle of Arthurian legend and the Cathar parfaits as the Grail's guardians. There is no historical evidence connecting the Cathar movement with Grail legends, which were a contemporary but independent literary tradition, and most historians regard the connection as a product of 19th and 20th century romantic imagination rather than historical reality. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding the Cathar treasure, what the medieval heretics hid before they were burned alive, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes the Inquisition records from the period 1244–1320, available in the Archives Nationales in Paris and the Archives Départementales in Carcassonne and Toulouse, are the primary documentary evidence for the escape and the nature of what was carried. Key testimonies, including those collected by the Inquisitor Jacques Fournier, later Pope Benedict Roman XII, provide details about Cathar communities, their movements, and their possessions in the period around the fall of Montségur. The references to the escape and its cargo are tantalizing but imprecise, enough to establish that something of significant value was taken, not enough to specify what it was. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented archaeological surveys of the cave systems in the Ariège and Aude departments near Montségur have found evidence of Cathar habitation, pottery, textiles, coins in several caves, confirming that the Pyrenean cave network was used as refuge by Cathar survivors after 1244. However, no survey has found physical evidence of a significant concealed treasure. The cave surveys have been conducted both by professional archaeologists and by treasure hunters, and the professional surveys, which have been most systematic in the Ariège, have yielded no relevant evidence beyond the general use of caves as shelter. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed the testimony of Imbert de Sales, the nobleman who observed the escape from Montségur and mentioned carrying the treasure of the Cathars, is a crucial piece of documentary evidence, but frustratingly imprecise. De Sales does not specify what the bundle contained and may not have known himself. The Inquisition's evident interest in the question, demonstrated by the frequency with which it was raised in subsequent interrogations, confirms that what was taken was considered significant by both the Cathars and the Inquisition. But without de Sales's testimony being more specific, the nature of the cargo remains unknown. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding the Cathar treasure, what the medieval heretics hid before they were burned alive. Now, we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. The Cathar treasure mystery remains an active focus for both academic historians and popular treasure hunters. The Heretics Department, which encompasses Montségur and the surrounding mountains, receives thousands of visitors annually who are drawn by the Cathar story, and tourism based on the Cathar Country Heritage Trail is a significant economic factor in the region. The castle ruins at Montségur, a 13th century fortress built after the 1244 destruction of the original Cathar refuge. On the same rock are a major heritage site maintained by the French state. Academic scholarship on the Cathars has moved significantly in recent decades from popular romanticism to rigorous historical investigation. Scholars including Mark Pegg, Monique Zerner, and Yul Brunn have produced detailed studies of Catharism based on close reading of the Inquisition records, often concluding that the Cathars were a more diverse, locally specific, and organizationally loose movement than the unified church portrayed in popular accounts. This academic revision has had limited impact on the popular image of the Cathars as romantic martyrs and guardians of secrets, an image sustained by decades of popular books, films, and tourism. The treasure remains unfound, if it ever existed in the form imagined by its seekers. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of the Cathar treasure, what the medieval heretics hid before they were burned alive, from the historical record. Through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Cathars ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please help us reach more people. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. If you are watching on Facebook, tap the follow button on our page to stay connected. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.